Radium, a material more radioactive than uranium, was applied to watches and aircraft clusters to make them glow in the darkness. The year was 1917, and because of the war, this property was in high demand. The substance that delivered this wonder was only recently discovered. The young women who took these jobs, primarily working-class girls in their teens and 20s, consider themselves lucky. The pay was excellent, the work clean and delicate, and the atmosphere on the factory floor was nice. They mixed the precious radium powder with a type of paint, which they then applied to watches. To achieve the precise microscopic point needed for the tiny clusters, they had to dip the brush into the glowing paint, then shape the bristles with their lips. Their supervisors and even the scientists assured them the material was absolutely harmless. They were told it was as safe as water. For fun, they painted their nails, their teeth, and their eyelids with the luminous material. When they left the factory and stepped into the darkness, they had a special, almost unhuman glow to them. The first victim started to fall mysteriously ill around 1921. The initial complaint was a toothache. When one of the girls had a tooth extracted, the socket refused to heal, instead forming a deep, agonizing ulcer. The infection spread and the bone began to disintegrate. In an incredible instance, a dentist was able to lift and remove her entire lower jawbone by hand, without resistance. The radium had been absorbed into their bodies through the constant lip pointing. It acts like an imposter for calcium, settling directly into the bone marrow, where it continuously unleashed its destructive radiation, riddling the bone structure with holes known as radium jaw. Grace Fryer, who had worked at the plant for 3 years, watched her own body begin to fail. By 1927, she had suffered excruciating pain and crippling dental problems, forcing her to wear a steel brace to keep her disintegrating spine upright. She, along with 4 other former co-workers, became the Radium Girls. They faced a powerful adversary, a corporation that hired doctors to lie, falsified reports, and employed powerful lawyers. The company's chilling calculation was simple. They could outlive the victims. The case was repeatedly delayed, stretching into 1928, when the women were just too weak to take part in court. However, public outrage forced a swift resolution. In June 1928, an out-of-court settlement was reached, providing each of the 5 women with a modest monetary settlement and an annuity for life, though none of them lived much longer to collect it. The legacy of the Radium Girls ultimately saved countless lives. Their fight, born of corporate greed, led directly to groundbreaking workplace safety regulations, establishing the legal right of individual employees to sue for damage. Their poisoned bones, which continue to glow today, are a permanent record of the price of industrial progress and the absolute necessity of prioritizing human life. The Anatoly Bugorski incident. The date was July 13, 1978. The place was deep within the Soviet Union, home to the largest particle accelerator of its kind in the nation. That evening, Anatoly Petrovich Bugorski, a 36-year-old dedicated particle physicist, was performing a routine task. A piece of ventilation equipment within the beam channel of the U-70 had malfunctioned. Maintenance required direct interaction with the apparatus, and Bugorski proceeded with the repair. The U-70 was designed to accelerate protons to a staggering energy, funneling them through a ring nearly a mile in diameter. Due to a catastrophic failure of the accelerator's safety interlock, Bugorski did not know the beam was active. He bent forward, peering into the channel to assess the fault. Then, he leaned his head through the small opening of the non-operational section. At precisely that moment, a single proton was fired down the vacuum tube. The proton beam, moving at the speed of light, struck Bugorski. He registered a flash of light so profound, he later described it as brighter than 1,000 suns. The beam entered his head, just behind his left ear, tearing through bone and brain tissue and exited near his left nostril. He felt no pain. Bugorski remarkably finished his maintenance, unaware he had just absorbed a localized radiation dose that should have killed him instantly. Anatoly Bugorski had received 1,000 times that in his head. When the reality of his exposure was confirmed hours later, he was rushed to a Moscow hospital. The left side of his face began to swell. Doctors monitored him, certain of the tragic, inevitable resolution: massive internal bleeding, neurological collapse, and death within days. But the physicist did not die. The intense energy that ripped through his brain caused immediate destruction. But because the beam was so incredibly narrow and focused, it spared the vast majority of his critical internal organs and the large part of his brain. The subsequent years revealed the unique and terrible price of his survival. The nerves on the left side of his face were destroyed, leaving that side permanently frozen, and, as it will be known later, aging slower than his normal side. He also became profoundly deaf in his left ear. Despite suffering severe, complex partial seizures as a consequence of the damaged brain tissue, Anatoly Bugorski returned to the institute. He completed his PhD, continuing his life's work as a particle physicist. His intellect, his defining characteristic, was spared.